Today we are going to discuss about the Indian Constitution. Why is it important to read the Indian Constitution? Why? Because it carries a lot of weightage in the subject, the Indian polity, for your competitive examinations. Hence, it becomes important for us to understand and also go through the various concepts of the Indian Constitution from the point of view of the competitive exams for SSC and others. So, in today's discussion, what all topics are we going to cover? The topics that we are going to cover in this chapter on the Indian Constitution are: what is the Constitution? What is a Constitution? The Indian Constitution, its making and the background. The making and background of the Indian Constitution as such. The demand for a Constituent Assembly. Composition and working of the Constituent Assembly. The various committees that were formed in the Constituent Assembly for drafting the Constitution. Enactment of the Constitution of India. Criticisms of the Indian Constitution and some important facts related to it. Now, to start off our discussion on this topic of the Indian Constitution, first of all we have to understand what is a constitution and why is it important to have a constitution for a particular country. As you see, the Constitution is a rule book. It contains various rules, sections, procedures and other provisions that explains the structure and functioning of the government of a particular country. It explains various rules, provisions and other procedures about the structure, the functioning and the various duties of the government towards a particular country. So, in short, what a government should do and what a government should not do is clearly explained in this Constitution. Hence, it is referred to as the rule book of the government. The government shall implement all the provisions, all the rules that are mentioned in the Constitution for the administration of the country. This is the preamble to the Indian Constitution. What is a preamble? Preamble can be understood as the preface to the Constitution. It explains the objectives, the goals of the government to its country and to its population. If you look at this copy of the Indian Preamble, it explains that the people of India have solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and more importantly, this Constitution will strive to secure to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality and fraternity. When we talk about justice, the Constitution of India will try to provide social, economic and political justice to its citizens, and it shall also aim to provide liberty of thought, liberty of expression and liberty of faith to its people. The Constitution also shall strive to provide equality of opportunities to every citizen and every individual of this country without any differences and without any discrimination as such. And more importantly, this Constitution will try to promote the integrity and fraternity among the population of the country. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949 hereby adopts, enacts and gives to ourselves this Constitution. So, what does this mean? On 26th day of November, as in 26th of November in 1949, this Constitution was adopted and enacted and it was presented to the people of the country. Now, the first important topic that we are going to cover in this chapter on the Indian Constitution is the making and the background of the Constitution. So, when was this first started? So what is the origin and what is the root of this idea of having a constitution for our country? In 1934, the idea of having a constituent assembly and the idea of having a constitution of ourselves was first put forward by M.N. Roy. So, M.N. Roy, who happens to be the pioneer of the communist movement of India, has first come forward with the idea of having a constituent assembly for our country which can draft a constitution for our people. In 1935, again, the Indian National Congress, which has spearheaded the Indian national movement or the freedom struggle for attaining independence from the Britishers, this party has officially demanded for a constituent assembly which can draft a constitution for India, for independent and free India. So, the difference between these two is the idea of having a constituent assembly was first put forward by M.N. Roy. It was not officially declared, but the idea in 1934 was M.N. Roy's idea. However, in 1935, this has put forward as an official declaration. This was officially declared by the Indian National Congress as a part of its manifesto to set up a constituent assembly for the Republic of India to draft a constitution for independent India and its population. In 1938, Jawaharlal Nehru, who happens to be one of the top leaders of the Indian National Congress, has, on behalf of the Indian National Congress, has declared that the constitution of the Republic of India should be prepared by the Constituent Assembly. So, Jawaharlal Nehru has declared officially on behalf of the Indian National Congress that whatever constitution that is prepared for the independent India should be prepared by a Constituent Assembly which is elected on the basis of adult franchisee. So, he did not want the interference from the outsiders. He wanted, and the Indian National Congress party has demanded that the constitution shall be adopted, the constitution shall be prepared by the people of our country, by the people of ourselves, and not the people who belongs to other countries and not from the outside interference. So, this is the brief background about the Indian Constitution. So, the important points that we have to remember, that we have to recollect from this particular subtopic on this chapter is the personality or the person who first come up with the idea of having a constituent assembly, which is M.N. Roy. M.N. Roy in 1934 has come forward with the idea of setting up a constituent assembly. And then the Indian National Congress. The Indian National Congress has first officially declared that the independent India shall have a constitution of its own in 1935. And then Jawaharlal Nehru, on behalf of Indian National Congress, has declared that the constitution of independent India shall be framed without any outside interference. So, these 3 points and these 3 important facts are important from the point of view of exam. Why? Because in the competitive exams, as we know, facts matter. The dates and the person's names will also be important. So, in the examination, you may be asked a question like, which among the following personalities has first come forward with the idea of having a constituent assembly for the country? You will be given options A, B, C, D, and in that the correct option would be M.N. Roy. So, from the point of view of exams, if you prepare a topic like this, then it will become more easier for you. It will become more convenient for you to cover all the important facts, all the important data from the point of view of exams to get good marks, to achieve good marks. Now, the demand for a constituent assembly. This demand was finally accepted by the Britishers in 1940. So, this demand for having a constituent assembly was finally accepted by the then British government in 1940. This is termed as the August Offer. So, August Offer of 1940 is the official declaration or recognition of the British government that the Constituent Assembly should be established or should be set up for framing the Indian Constitution for the independent India. So, again from the point of view of exams, this fact, August Offer of 1940. So, in the examinations you may be asked, August Offer of 1940 with respect to the Indian national movement is significant for the below reasons. You will be given options A, B, C, D. In that, the correct option would be that the Britishers have finally accepted the demand from the Indian National Congress for setting up the Constituent Assembly for drafting a constitution for free and independent India. So, August Offer of 1940 is also an important fact, should be recollected from the point of view of exams. However, in 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps, who happens to be a member of the cabinet of the British government, was sent to India with a draft proposal of the British government for framing the Constituent Assembly for the independent India. As a follow-up to this, a cabinet mission plan was sent to India to establish or to accomplish this task. The cabinet mission plan comprises of three important personalities. Who are these personalities? Why should we recollect these names is very important. Why? Because cabinet mission plan comprises of only three important figures, three important personalities, and these three personalities belong to the British government. So, they were sent to India to accomplish this task of setting up the Constituent Assembly. So, one such personality, one such person was Sir Stafford Cripps. Now, the composition of the Constituent Assembly. Now, the idea was declared by the freedom fighters, and this demand was officially accepted and recognized by the Britishers, and then it was time for them to compose or to constitute the Constituent Assembly. Now, the composition of the Constituent Assembly also very important. So, what is the composition? Who all have participated in the Constituent Assembly is also very important from the point of view of exams. The Constituent Assembly was first set up or established in 1946 November. This Constituent Assembly was formed on the basis of the proposals or the recommendations which are made by the cabinet mission plan. Very important fact here. In the examination, you may be asked a question. The Indian Constituent Assembly was established or set up on the basis of the proposals of which of the following? Options A, B, C, D. Out of these options, as you see, cabinet mission plan on the basis of the proposals or the recommendations made by the cabinet mission plan, the Indian Constituent Assembly was established will be the correct answer. So, the composition of the Constituent Assembly, few important facts, again very important from the point of view of exams, very simple. Total strength 389 seats only. So, the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was 389. 296 seats out of 389 seats were allotted to the British India. Out of this 296 seats, 292 seats were allotted to 11 governors' provinces, and the balance or the remaining 4 seats were allotted to chief commissioners' provinces. So, out of 389 seats, 296 seats were allocated to the British India. Out of 296, again 292 from 11 governors' provinces and the balance 4 from chief commissioners' provinces. 389 minus 296 will be 93. These 93 seats are allotted to the princely states. Very important fact, 389 seats, out of which 296 went to British India and the balance 93 were allotted to the princely states. Each and every seat of these 389 seats were allotted to the provinces on the basis of the population of the respective provinces. What is the population? According to that, the number of seats have been allotted. So, if you have a rough estimate, the final calculation would come to this number, which is one seat has been allotted to 1 million population. Not very important, but just for understanding purposes, we may understand that one seat was allotted to a million population as in 10 lakhs. So, this is the composition, the strength of the Constituent Assembly. Every province has consisted of various religious communities. So, these seats were also allotted to those provinces on the basis of the religious composition of the respective provinces, like Muslims, Sikhs and other religious communities. So, all these religious communities like either the Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs or Christians or other religious communities, according to their population, these seats have been allotted to those provinces. The representatives of each and every province were elected by the members of that community who belong to that provincial legislative assembly. The members of the community who belong to the legislative assembly of that particular province have elected these representatives of the Constituent Assembly by the basis of voting. So, this was not orally done. There was a method, there was a procedure that was implemented, that was followed in choosing the representatives for those provinces, for filling up the strength of 389 seats. This was done on the basis of the voting, which is done by the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. So, just understand that the members of the Constituent Assembly were elected on the basis of proportional representation and by single transferable vote. The representatives of the princely states, like we just discussed a while ago, that 93 seats have been allotted to the princely states. So, these 93 representatives belonging to the princely states were nominated by the heads of the princely states. So, for the representatives of the princely states, there was no method of voting, there was no election as such, but these members of the princely states were nominated by the heads of those princely states. So, the head of a princely state would nominate one member as a representative of that princely state. Hence, it is clear from this point of view that the Constituent Assembly, the final composition of the Constituent Assembly is partly elected and partly nominated. 296 seats were elected by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies and 93 seats of princely states were nominated by the heads of the princely states. Hence, for this fact, for this reason, the Constituent Assembly is considered to be partly elected and partly nominated body, and in that it is indirectly elected by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies. Elected but indirectly elected. From the point of view of exam, how can a question be framed on this particular topic? The question will be asked in such a way that the Indian Constituent Assembly was a fully elected body, or the Indian Constituent Assembly was a completely nominated body? No. But the correct answer would be the Indian Constituent Assembly is partly elected and partly nominated body. Very important. Hence, from the point of view of exams, it is important for us to understand and also recollect that the Constituent Assembly is partly elected and partly nominated body. So, this is about the composition and the strength of the Constituent Assembly. If you look at this picture shows you the representatives or the members who were elected and also nominated for the Constituent Assembly. If you see Jawaharlal Nehru, Ambedkar and other famous personalities, Dr. Babu Rajendra Prasad and many other stalwarts of the Indian freedom struggle have represented the Indian Constituent Assembly from their respective provinces. The Constituent Assembly was established, elections were done and the members were elected and few of them were nominated. Now the Constituent Assembly has been finally formed. Now it is the duty or it is the task of this Constituent Assembly to start its working for framing or drafting the constitution. Why? Because it is the basic idea, it is the reason or it is the purpose for which this Constituent Assembly was formed, for drafting the constitution for independent India. So on December 9, 1946, the Constituent Assembly has started its working. The Muslim League party has boycotted the proceedings or the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly, and this party has insisted on creating a separate state of Pakistan. Only 211 members out of a total of 389 members have participated in the first proceedings or in the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly. One of the oldest members of all the representatives of the Assembly, Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, was elected as the temporary president of the Assembly by following the method of French practice. In France, there is a practice of electing the senior-most or the eldest member of the Assembly as the temporary president of the Assembly for the time being. This same practice is also adopted by the Indian Constituent Assembly, and following this practice, Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, who happens to be the eldest member of the Indian Constituent Assembly, was elected temporarily as the president of the Assembly. So very important again to remember that by following the French practice, by way of implementing the French practice, the Indian Constituent Assembly has elected one of its oldest members, Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, as the temporary president of its Assembly. Later on, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the official permanent president of the Constituent Assembly by way of voting. H.C. Mukherjee and T.T. Krishnamachari were elected as the vice presidents of the Constituent Assembly. Important facts again. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the president of the Assembly, and H.C. Mukherjee and T.T. Krishnamachari were elected as the vice presidents of the Constituent Assembly. So this is the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly and the proceedings which took place in the first sitting of the Constituent Assembly, which taken place on December 9, 1946. So few important facts and few important names from this topic of the working of Indian Constituent Assembly is also important from the point of view of exams. If you look at this picture, this is the central hall of the Parliament building, inside which the first session of the Indian Constituent Assembly was held. If you see, all the members, all the representatives who were elected and also nominated were participating in the sessions of the Constituent Assembly on December 6, December 9th, 1946. Objectives resolution. What is the objectives resolution? It is very important. Why? Because on December 13, 1946, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has moved this historic objectives resolution in the Constituent Assembly. This resolution has put forward the fundamentals and the philosophy of the Indian Constitution. What are the objectives of the Indian Constitution? What are its fundamentals and what should be its philosophy is explained in this objectives resolution, which is moved by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru on December 13th, 1946. This objectives resolution was unanimously accepted, unanimously approved by the Constituent Assembly on 22nd January 1947. This objectives resolution has eventually shaped the making of the Indian Constitution at each and every successive stage. In its making, this objectives resolution has continuously influenced the drafting of the Indian Constitution by the makers of the drafting committee. Subsequently, gradually over a period of time, the modified version of this objectives resolution became the preamble to the Indian Constitution. What is the preamble? Just a while ago we have seen the preface of the Indian Constitution, which has laid down the principles and the philosophy of the government to its people, like providing justice, liberty, equality and fraternity. That preamble's previous version is objectives resolution. So, objectives resolution has been modified and later it became the preamble to the Indian Constitution. So, objectives resolution, on which date this was put forward and on which date this was approved, and what is the composition or what is the philosophy of the objectives resolution is important. And this objectives resolution, as you know, is unanimously approved by the Constituent Assembly. Also very important fact to remember from the point of view of exams. Each and every important fact is very important. It plays a very crucial role in deciding those marks which can either put you in the list or make you go out of the list. So, this is about the objectives resolution. Now, apart from making the Indian Constitution, apart from drafting the Indian Constitution, there are other various tasks, other various functions, other various duties which are performed by the Constituent Assembly. So, what are these duties? Apart from drafting the Indian Constitution, this Constituent Assembly has also ratified or approved the membership of India into the Commonwealth of Nations on 1949 May. So, ratification of India's membership into the Commonwealth of Nations was also made or was also performed by the Constituent Assembly. Apart from this, the Indian Constitution or the Indian Constituent Assembly has also adopted the Indian national flag on July 22, 1947. So, the Indian national flag was also adopted by the Indian Constituent Assembly on 22nd July 1947. The Indian national anthem was also adopted by the Constituent Assembly on 24th January 1950. The Indian national song was also adopted by the Assembly on 24th January 1950. Not only this Constituent Assembly has also elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the first President of the Republic of India on 24th January 1950. So, these 5 important tasks were performed by the Constituent Assembly apart from its fundamental purpose of drafting the Constitution of India. It ratified India's membership into the Commonwealth of Nations in May 1949. It adopted the Indian national flag. It adopted the Indian national song. It adopted the Indian national anthem also. And finally, it has elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as the President of the Republic of India in January 24, 1950. So, these important tasks and these dates are also important. Now, how can a question be framed in the exam? The Indian Constituent Assembly has performed the below tasks, options, and it will ask you to match with the dates, like it adopted the Indian national flag and date. It adopted the Indian national anthem, Indian national song, dates. So, it will ask you to match these tasks with its dates. So, you should be able to identify on which date a particular task was adopted, on which date a particular task was fulfilled. Only then you will be able to answer that question. So, from the point of view of exams, it is also important for you to understand how a question can be framed, how a question can be framed in the examination on a particular topic. How can facts become important from the point of view of the question? If you understand this logic, if you implement this logic while preparing for the exams, it will make your job more easier. So, the Constituent Assembly has conducted its operations in 11 sessions. All in all, this assembly has participated in a total of 11 sessions which has spanned for 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. So, the total duration of the working of the Indian Constituent Assembly is 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. Not very important, but just understand that from the time this assembly was formed, that is in 1946 November, from then it took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days for the Constituent Assembly to perform all the duties and to fulfill all the activities, all the tasks it has taken up for itself. To prepare the Constitution of India, the framers or the makers of the Indian Constitution have gone through or have reviewed the constitutions of over 60 countries. Constitutions of more than 60 countries have been reviewed in detail by the makers or the framers of the Constitution of India for framing or drafting the Constitution for its independent and Republic India. After the final draft of the Constitution was prepared, this draft copy was observed or considered by the Assembly for a total of 114 days. Remember one important difference here. The total duration of the Constituent Assembly was 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. It is not the time that the Constituent Assembly has taken for drafting the Constitution, no. It is the total duration. It is the total duration for which the Constituent Assembly has performed its operations. So, right from the time it established till the time it got dissolved, the total duration was 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. But what is the time that was taken by the Constituent Assembly for framing the Constitution is a different question. The total expenditure that was incurred by the Assembly for developing or for framing the Constitution is 64 lakh rupees. At that time, in late 1940s, the total amount that was expended by the assembly for preparing this draft copy of the constitution is 64 lakh rupees. Now, this is about the other various functions which are taken up by the Indian Constituent Assembly. On 24th January 1950, the Indian Constituent Assembly has held its final or concluding session. However, after this, the Constituent Assembly did not got dissolved. It continued as a Provisional Parliament of Independent India from January 26, 1950 till the time a new parliament was formed after the general elections of 1951-52. So, on January 24, 1950, the final session of the Constituent Assembly was held. However, from January 26, 1950 till the time a new parliament was formed after the general elections of 51-52, till that time this Constituent Assembly has performed the role of the Provisional Parliament or the Parliament in transition. Now, what are the various committees of the Constituent Assembly? There are a total of more than 20 committees which are set up by the Constituent Assembly for taking up various activities, for performing various objectives. All these committees can be classified into only two types: major committees and minor committees. What are these major committees? What are these minor committees? Is it important for an aspirant to remember or to recollect each and every committee, either major or minor committee, for the exams? No. There are only a few important, very important committees, either major or minor, from the point of view of exams. Only those shall be remembered, only those shall be recollected from the point of view of exams, not each and every committee. If you do that, it will be a waste of time. Why? Because there are a lot of contents that needs to be covered for the exams. The syllabus itself is very vast. So, if you go into detail and if you try to cover, if you try to recollect each and every fact, each and every information, then that is not at all called as a smart way of preparation. A smart aspirant, a smart student will always give priority, will always give importance to only those topics which are considered to be crucial and important from the point of view of exams, and the rest of the topics that smart candidate will try to ignore and save his time and energy to focus more on those topics which are important, which are expected to be appeared as questions on the question paper. Now, out of all the committees that were set up by the assembly, only 8 committees were classified as major and the rest of the committees were classified as minor committees. So, what are the names of these committees and who are their chairmen is also important. These are the 8 major committees set up by the Constituent Assembly. Major committee, one of the major committees and the most important major committee, the most important committee of all the major committees is the drafting committee, which is chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, this drafting committee is a major committee and one of the most important or the foremost important committee of all the major committees. This drafting committee has took up the responsibility of making a constitution or drafting or preparing the constitution for free India. This drafting committee was chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. The first major committee, Union Powers Committee, was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. Second major committee, Union Constitution Committee, was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru himself. Provincial Constitution Committee was headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights was headed by Sardar Patel. So, this Advisory Committee on the Fundamental Rights, Minorities, Tribal and Excluded Areas, and it is headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, is one of the important committees after the drafting committee. Why? Because this advisory committee has 5 subcommittees inside it: Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, Minorities Subcommittee, Northeast Frontier, Tribal Areas and Assam Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittee, Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas other than those in Assam Subcommittee, Northwest Frontier Tribal Areas Subcommittee. So, the Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Tribals, Minorities and Excluded Areas is headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and inside which there are 5 subcommittees headed by these people. J.B. Kripalani is the chairman of the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee. H.C. Mukherjee is the chairman of Minorities Subcommittee. Gopinath Bordoloi is the chairman of Northeast Frontier Tribal Areas and Assam Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittee. A.V. Thakkar is the chairman of Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas other than those in Assam Subcommittee. So, these committees and the subcommittees in the advisory committee are important. These are the various minor committees which are also set up by the Constituent Assembly for performing various other functions. For example, the Finance and Staff Committee, House Committee, Ad hoc Committee on the National Flag, Ad hoc Committee on Supreme Court. From my observation of the question paper, previous year question papers, I do not consider these minor committees to be that much important as much as the major committees are from the point of view of exams. No. The drafting committee of the Indian Constituent Assembly was constituted under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar on 29th of August 1947, and this is the drafting committee and the members of the drafting committee. As I said, the drafting committee was headed or chaired by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself, and who are the other members of the drafting committee is also very important. Why? Because the drafting committee has prepared the Indian Constitution. So, it is also important for us to recollect or to know the composition of the drafting committee. So, it consisted of a total of 7 members. So, the drafting committee has a total of 7 members. Who are these 7 members? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as the chairman, N. Gopalaswamy Iyengar, Alladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, Dr. K. M. Munshi, Syed Muhammad Sadullah, N. Madhavarao and T.T. Krishnamachari. N. Madhavarao has replaced B.L. Mittar, who resigned due to ill health. T.T. Krishnamachari has replaced D.P. Khaitan, who died in 1948. So, 7 members of the drafting committee, and who replaced whom is also important. N. Madhavarao replaced B.L. Mittar. T.T. Krishnamachari replaced D.P. Khaitan. This drafting committee has taken into consideration the proposals and recommendations of other committees of the Constituent Assembly, and it has prepared its first draft of the Indian Constitution, and it published that in the month of February 1948. So, in August 1947, this drafting committee was established, and in the month of February 1948, the first copy of the draft of the Indian Constitution was published. The people of India, or basically the Constituent Assembly, was given 8 months of time to discuss the draft proposals and also to propose amendments to the Constitution, to the draft of the Constitution. The drafting committee has took less than 6 months of time to prepare the draft of the Indian Constitution. All in all, this drafting committee has held its meetings or held its sittings for just 141 days, which is less than say 3 months, 6 months. So, the drafting committee took less than 6 months of time to come up with the draft copy of the Indian Constitution. From the time it got established till the time it prepared its first draft copy, it took less than 141 days, which is less than 6 months time. So, important facts.